If I could please ask everybody to stand for the arrival of the official party.
Tēnei te tū o uki te tirera I ko koutou anō re kua hau mai. Tēnei te me I atu nau mai wakatau mai re
If I can ask everybody to please be seated.
Kōri I pō, kōri I ao. Ai tūria ki te whakaau nōtu. Nōtu te I, nōtu te wewe, nōtu te wana wana. Tui ki te a, tu a painga. Tu whakaputi ki te whai ao, ki te ao mārama, ati he mauri ora. E me I mai o a, ko karanga atu, ki a koutou katoa, nau mai, ara mai. Ngā premier, ngā mei, ki a kōrua, ki a koutou rauranga tira mā, he tino me I tēnei. Mauria mai o koutou mate, me ngā mauma ara, o ngā oia, mai ia mau tere. I inga, I pare koratia I ngā pakanga o te ao. Mō I oi, ko hotu ngia ngā uma, ko ekenga ngā roi mata, me nge te hupe. Ko reti ngia rātau ki tō o te ārai. Nō reira me kei, kia koutou o te unga wairua, moi mai rā, moi mai rā. Kia koutou o te Aotearoa, nau mai, ara mai, piki mai, kake mai. He tino rangi tēnei, he tino kaupapa. Te kaupapa o te tūwhetatanga o tēnei mauma aratanga, te hotu nui, o te moana nui ākiwa. Kua ruia, ngā iwi o ia motu. Mō I o ai koutou, e wānau ko tai ai tātou katoa. E ori te whakapapa mai, ngā mau te rea taino mai ki Aotearoa nei. Nō reira, nau mai, ara mai, piki mai, kake mai. Tue kana mā, taina mā. E wānau ko tai ai tātou, mō I o ai tātou katoa, nā ngā ingoa o ngā mau tere. Nā te ōrititanga o ngā reo, me kei, nā ngā mata o tātou katoa. Nō reira nau mai, whakatau mai. Tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa. E re rā te motu nei ki roto ko ia o pari akana to urai waka ai re mai ngā tikanga I tere pai ai te motu nei tō pikitanga kei te pure poto he ke tanga kei toro anui kia o karongo koe ki tere ka mai o te kōrero ai. Mātau tonu au ki a koe e tau e te ngākau waka puke tonu mea ai ara e mauru e ko te au ka weru waka momotu e whiu ana kei te uru e kei te tonga ka ara mai ki roto ka ko ari. Nō reira, ko tūwhera tia te tatau o te wā I ngaro a mākue e whakakapi pēnei ai. Koutou te honga wairua, moi mai rā. Tātou o te honga ora, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tātou katoa, kia ora.
Ke ake ke pai o ke rangi, ke ifo ke pui la whanua. Mono tangara. Tau! Mataki mua! Mataki tua! Manu tangara! Tu takina mai! Kai Pukehau nei! Tu takina mai! Kai Pukehau nei! Sirasi mai! Ake mai! Ake mai! Ake mai! Manu! Manu! Manu tangara! Ke ake ke pai o ke rangi, ke ifo ke pui la whanua. Tangaloe! Tangaloe! Whawhasei mai! Whakamonuina mai! Aku tau toa! Sirasi mai! Whakamonu! Whakamonu! Whakamonu kia tangaloa! Gitu, gitu, hea! Hea! Whakangaruru! Alu! Alu! Whakangaruru! Alu! Alu! Whakangaruru! Kiunga! Unga! Kaya! Kaya! Nei! Koe makauri e! Au! Koe makauri e! Koe nge nge nge! Koe whakawiki ua! Kia tuki te ulu! Kia tuki te ulu! Aki e alelo hi! Hi! Aki e alelo hi! Hi! Aku tau mata! Tuki te ulu! Aku tau mata! Tuki te ulu! Tuki! 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 Hia! Tokurua! Ta! Ta! Taulu! Ta! Ta! Taulu! Toia! Tua! Tua! Toia!
Koe whanaunga he mawhola kia. Whaka moe nui na mai he atua.
Tua! Gele! Gele!
Away too low!
Ina mana, ina reo, raurangatera mā taranaki whānui. Tēnā koutou katoa. On behalf of Manutu Taonga, the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to Pukehau National War Memorial Park this morning. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the special guests in attendance today, the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, other ministers and members of Parliament, the Honourable Mark Brown, Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, members of the Diplomatic Corps, especially those representing Pacific nations, Michael Tuffrey and Harriet Mellish O'Neill architects, designers of the beautiful memorial, esteemed guests, members of the public, a very warm welcome to you all. I'd like to very briefly talk a little bit about this place. The Pukehau National War Memorial Park opened in 2015, incorporating the National War Memorial, which has stood here since 1932. Pukehau is intended as a space for all New Zealanders to remember our country's sacrifice in times of war, to remember our ongoing commitment to peace, to remember and reflect on the special relationships we share with our friends and allies around the world. Over the past 6 years, we've been privileged to welcome memorials for Australia, Belgium, France, Turkey, the United Kingdom, the United States, and today, Pacific Islands. Another very special place in the park is the Pukehau Education Centre, the brick building just behind me. Originally known as the Home of Compassion Creche, it opened at the beginning of the First World War as a place that mothers could leave their children in care while they worked, with their husbands away at war. It is a reminder that sacrifices were not only made by those that served. It is now a place where schools and groups gather and learn about New Zealand's involvement in conflict and peacekeeping. So thank you for joining us to dedicate this beautiful memorial and to reflect on the service and sacrifice of Pacific peoples in times of conflict. Once again, welcome. Welcome to your park.
Tēnā tātou katoa, whakalofa ke atu, mā loa lelei, mā loa ni. Whakatālofa atu, tā lofa lava, Nissan Bulavinaka, noa ia, Māori, kia ora tātou katoa, and good morning to you all. We'd like to thank Bernadette Kavanagh, the Chief Executive of Manatū Taonga, for those opening words. And as I said earlier, my name is Karen Rangi, and I'm honoured to be your host for this very special dedication ceremony here in Pukehau National War Memorial Park. As well as all of you who are gathered here in the park this morning, we have a live stream to the Pacific Islands, so I'd like to welcome all of you also. I'm here today as the Chair of the Arts Council of New Zealand, Toi Aotearoa, but even more importantly to represent my great-great-grand-uncle, Sergeant Benny Barnaba, a member of the 2nd Rarotongan contingent who fought in World War I in Egypt alongside 500 other soldiers from the Cook Islands to support the New Zealand war effort. Sadly, he never got to return home to his home island of Manihiki as he died from illness on his way back and is buried here in New Zealand at O'Neill's Point in Devonport. So today, I think of him and all his comrades from the Pacific as we dedicate this beautiful memorial to the service to all of us. And I'm grateful for the efforts of Alfred Ngaro and the 500 Cook Islands Soldiers Committee for their tireless work to shine a light on the Pacific contribution to World War I. I'd now like to invite Pastor Tere Moana Tauira Maka to deliver the opening prayer supported by the Porirua Cook Islands community.
Mumo ke ora tātou kātou toa I te roa mātou tō tātou atu ko Yesu Mesia, ko te rāte te akono Yehova, ka reka tātou e ka perepere kāwana. Pore tātou ki te atua, let us pray. Te atua mana, te atua ka kārunga tarangi tētei, tia mātou I mua tōna tapunui, tā mātou pure aka mete ka rarangi a koe Yesu atu mō. Tia rā mānia tā oronga me no mātou I te atua. Te atua I rungara wātu, te ako koronga I tāma e mātou, te reo hotu nui o te moana a kiwa. I tāma e mātou I te atua, tā mātou pure I ti atianga nei. Tōna wairo tapu ki aka tapu mai, aka tainu mai te wanganga kātou toa tā mātou kārawe. Mei te kamatanga taera wātu ki te akaoteanga. Te ia te kairo E te atua, no tō mātou ui tupo nei te atua te aere ki te mate atu ki te tamakianga I te atua. Te manganuanga kari oki mai ki te ipu karea. Te ia te kairo E te atua, mātou kātou tō te mātua puru mai. I te aka maara I a rātou rungara wātu I te atua. I te aka metiki a koe. No tō mātou ora e no tō mātou metiki I tiara. No o wairua mai te atua no mātou, te ongangang kātou tō tā mātou kārawe. Aka kore mai tā mātou arai mangunu tā mā ore te rere toto Yesu tō mātou atu tō mātou akaora. Pure aka metiki aka rarangi mātou I a koe Yesu atu mau. Ti anei e tuatata o atu. Amene.
Aka meitaki a Yehova,
Ahe, e ora mai.
aere mai ki ruai dana roa mate I mene. Arutenu akatoa, aka meitaki a Yehova,
Ahe, e ora mai.
aere mai
patatu. Aka meita ki tōna ingoa. He Yehova he aka patatu. He aka meita ki tōna ingoa. Ia Yehova ka tuia ere mua e tōna. Ara tua tua mau he te rauki, te rauki e.
Thank you to Pastor Tauira Maka and the Porirua Cook Islands community. It's my pleasure now to invite to address us the person that we have to thank for this beautiful memorial behind us. I'd welcome Michael Tuffrey to give his address.
Tēnā koutou katoa, kia rana, talofa, malolelei, unamanaka. And there's probably a whole lot of other introductions from the Kiwi that I need to go to, but we'll fill that void with this sculpture here. But first I want to acknowledge the tangata whenua for actually providing this space for this piece here. Also, I want to actually acknowledge Prime Minister Ardern, Prime Minister Mr. Brown, the PI Commission, Tommy Scanlon, and the reason why I'm pulling them out, because when I actually came up with this idea to Tommy, when we were talking to the commissions, it was an emotional moment when one of the embassy for the Papua New Guinea was an ex-soldier. And we had an emotional moment talking about this memorial. But also I want to actually acknowledge MFAT, Sodi and Brody, MCH, MPP, and also the most important team, which is called the selection team, to actually provide us this space to pick this piece. Of course, there's always a reason why we're doing this. And it was Alfred that gave me the phone call, and it came through Sue and Grace from Te Papa. We found out about this shell, this one shell that was actually in the Aras tunnels. Also, I want to acknowledge the whānau back in the Cook Islands, especially Isaac Solomon and Momoy Hobbs. When we took that trip up to Aras, it was a very emotional trip because we went searching for the shell. And we drive past this tunnel every day, and nobody actually realised the bigger narrative behind this shell. There was 3 Cook Island soldiers, along with the New Zealand Tunnelling Company and also the Māori Battalion, but I had no idea this story existed. So I went on my own trip up to Aras to look for the shell. And the curators apologised, this is on Armistice Day, that the shell had been removed to a private museum. So therefore, this created this beautiful narrative. From a gut instinct, I actually wanted to actually use this as the main basis for this narrative. Also, I want to acknowledge Nick Hurley, who's actually been one of the ones who instigators who's always actually backed us up on the major projects out in the Cook Islands and in Samoa. Also, and actually Prime Minister Brown was actually at the Cook Islands workshop that we ran for the tamariki, and it was an emotional moment because what we did, we wanted to build a narrative, a strong story, because this was always about empowering the tamariki, about their ancestors, about their whānau. And part of my whānau for the last 3 years, and forgive me guys, to create this piece, is Tan Greenwell, who's a 3D digital artist who actually helped me create this piece. Also the most amazing engineer, Adam Thornton and Alistair. Sir Richard Taylor and Rob, and also Digitech, Dr. Hao, Dr. Zhao, and the casting team, Mr. Lee, the two Mr. Lees. And finally, LT McGuinness. What a team. Dan and Kieran and Matt. I had to actually ask for the name, and we discussed it with the World War II committee, World War I committee, and we wanted to give it the tangata whenua the rights for this taonga. And I want to acknowledge Rane for gifting us this name, Te Reo Hotunui o Te Moana a Kiwa, because it gave us the why we are doing this, to acknowledge those whānau, especially the wahine toa. And I love it that we actually got it here right next to the Home of Compassion in this space. I feel really blessed and honoured actually to have the tamariki here, because they are the narrative. They're going to create the new narrative. And all I can say is, like, I'm asking the families, please come and share your stories with your grandfather about your parents who were actually involved in World War I and to the now. Whawhatai lawa.
Thank you, Michael. And in naming all those people that have been involved, you remind us that it takes a village to raise something good. It's my pleasure now to invite the Prime Minister of New Zealand, the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern, to give the keynote address this morning.
Tēnā koutou katoa, whakatalofa atu, malo lalei, malo ni, whakalofa lahi atu, kia orana, talofa lava, nisa bulavanaka, Māori, and warm Pacific greetings to everyone here. To the Honourable Mark Brown, Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, members of the Diplomatic Corps representing their countries at this event today, my fellow Ministers, Minister Poto Williams, the Honourable Meka Whaitiri, the Honourable Penny Henare, the Honourable Opito Williams-Seo, I acknowledge each of you. And to our members of Parliament, esteemed guests, no mai harimai welcome. To the families who have lost loved ones in times of war and conflict, I acknowledge the grief and pain that you suffered and feel honoured to have you with us here today. The dedication of the Pacific Islands Memorial was due to take place a year ago, at the height of lockdown. That's what makes it particularly special to finally be able to welcome you here to Pukehau National War Memorial Park for this long-awaited event. This memorial stands in recognition of the service and sacrifice of the Pacific peoples who supported New Zealand in the First and Second World Wars and in subsequent conflicts around the world. It also stands as a symbol of Aotearoa New Zealand's special bond and enduring friendship with our Pacific neighbours. I'd like to sincerely thank Michael and Harriet Mellish O'Neill Architects for their beautiful and thoughtful design, which already feels like an integral part of the landscape here at Pukehau. The design of the Pacific Islands Memorial, as you've heard, is poignantly named Te Reo Hotunui o Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, the deep sigh of the Pacific. In preparation for the memorial's installation, Māori stones from the Pacific Islands in New Zealand were blessed and buried at the foundations of this memorial, infusing it with the spirit of the Pacific. In this special place, we come to remember and we reflect and we find another, perhaps lesser known connection to fallen Pacific warriors. The Pukehau trees here at the National War Memorial were planted by Te Atiawa in iwi, which shares a long connection with Pacific peoples, to acknowledge the courage of Pacific soldiers and in recognition of those who fell. The Pukehau symbolise the eternal and sacred bond between the living and the dead, a bond we acknowledge here today. Pacific people served under the New Zealand flag in both World Wars in foreign lands many miles from home and the life they knew. Many also served on the home front. I especially acknowledge the Pacific Island Coast Watchers, risking themselves to protect their homes, families, and the wider region. During the First World War especially, Pacific soldiers faced many additional hardships in their service. They had to endure colder climates and language barriers, but one of the greatest causes of suffering for Pacific soldiers was their exposure to foreign illness and disease. Even with fighting over, they were cruelly confronted with the 1918 influenza epidemic which swept the world and had a lasting and devastating effect. Cook Island-born poet Alistair Tearika Campbell lost his older brother, Maireriki, in Italy during the Second World War. In his sonnet, 446853, Private Essay Campbell, Alistair wrote of his brother at war, quote, "Shot dead crossing an Italian stream. You were always the most vulnerable of us and the most gentle and able. You were like a butterfly in a storm." Campbell also wrote of his 99-year-old grandfather, quote, "When he came to die, he wept fiercely for my brother killed many years before in Italy. He called out many times for his Maireriki, his little flower, and then he died." In these lines, we find and hear the terrible pain of war that lingers silent and invisible for many generations. And so I wish to acknowledge those here and in the Pacific whose families grew up with such loss, whose loved ones lie in foreign soil, in cemeteries of Europe and North Africa, and here in Aotearoa. The Pacific Islands Memorial, may it be a place to come and reflect and remember. In the memory of those lost, we also think of what we gained, a deeper connection with our past and with each other, our families, our communities. Aotearoa's place in the Pacific, and we will always, his place is in the Pacific, and we will always stand in solidarity with our Pacific neighbours, acting on the world stage in the name of peace and prosperity. This morning, in this beautiful place, in the shadow of this beautiful monument, we stand together in gratitude for one another, in reverence and in remembrance. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your address to us this morning and for reminding us of the connections that we have here between Aotearoa and the Pacific. We've now come to the time of the dedication of our beautiful memorial, Te Reo Hotonui o Te Moana Kiwa.
E te reo hotu nui, te moa nui ākiwa, nau mai, hara mai, whakatau mai. Mai ia, te tipua mai ia, te tawato mai ia, te kāui āreki. Mai ia e tā e āro. Tū tapa mai nuku, tū tapa mai rangi, tū tapa ko ngā mauri. Ia umai no te urewa. O wii te o inga nāre ki tēnei tau whiowhio. O wii te karunga tipua tēnei te whakaraurika. O wii te paria tū mai rawe a whiwhia ki a tāne. O wii te oro, i te oro. Whakatūrau ki te reo te aureo tapu i takina mai o ai kinoi o ai kiroa o ai ki pāmāma. Tū ake tau ake tēnei tau mauma aratanga. Hei te rea ki ngā mau maaratanga.
Kia tuia,
O ngā
ki
oia,
raro.
kua pare u
Kia tuia,
gratia.
ki te here tangata
Nau
tātou,
mai,
e tu
whakatau
ohu nei
mai,
e.
kua wātea, ai rā, kua wātea.
We have now come to the laying of the floral tributes by our Prime Ministers and representatives from the Pacific Island countries. During this time we will be serenaded by our beautiful soloist Te Alemoa Lemisio, accompanied by her father Vaka Lemisio. The Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern, on behalf of the people of New Zealand, and the Honourable Mark Brown, on behalf of the people of the Cook Islands. His Excellency Mr. Liasi Papali I Tommy Scanlon, on behalf of the people of Samoa, and His Excellency Brigadier General Francis Agui, on behalf of the people of the independent state of Papua New Guinea. His Excellency Mr. Filimoni Wangabafa, on behalf of the people of the Republic of Fiji, and His Excellency Mr. Paulson Panapa, on behalf of the people of Tuvalu. His Excellency Honourable Fisa Pihingia, on behalf of the people of Niue, and Her Excellency Mrs. Sylvain Carter Levea, on behalf of the people of French Polynesia and New Caledonia. Mr. John Kimakeza, on behalf of the people of the Solomon Islands, and Mrs. Sanyana Kiev, on behalf of the people of the Republic of Vanuatu. Mr. Ben Otang, on behalf of the people of the Republic of Kiribati, and His Excellency Mr. Richard Griffith, on behalf of the people of Nauru, Federated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and Palau. Mr. Lenny Siloti, Star Futi Ao, on behalf of the people of Tonga, and Dr. Iuta Tinielu, on behalf of the people of Tokelau. Air Marshal Kevin Short, on behalf of the New Zealand Defence Force, and Air Vice Marshal Robin Klitcher, retired, on behalf of the Royal New Zealand Returned and Services Association. I'd now ask you all to please stand for the playing of the last post, followed by the readings of the ode, after which we will observe a 1-minute silence. E kore rātou e kaumātua tia. Pēnei ia tātou kua mahue nei. E kore hoki rātou e ngoi kore. Aha kua pēhia i ngā āhuatanga o te wā. I te hekinga atua tera, tai noa ki te aranga mai i te ata. Ka maumahara tonu tātou kia rātou.
Babai oloketa ino save olo. As Yumi, who is stuck behind by save olo. Aids babai no make him oloketa tired, and oloketa ia no down him oloketa. Long time sunny go down and low mone. Babai Yumi remember him oloketa. Babai Yumi remember him oloketa.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. In the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Please be seated. It's my pleasure now to invite to the podium the Prime Minister of the Cook Islands, Te Ara Rangatira, the Honourable Mark Brown, to address us this morning.
E maunganoko, ko te iku o te langi. E tau a tiraro, ko awarua, ko tapu a tea. E awa, ko te tui ka moana. E ariki, ko makea, ko karika, ko wakaatini. E waka, ko te au o tonga. Ko tae mai te kapiki a Aotearoa I te tumu enua. E te tumu e neke mai. E te tumu e oro mai. E te tumu e tau mai. Wa tuku mai te waka te aua tonga. Tā rātou rangatira. Ko tele mai nā lunga te moana nui a kiwa. Nā loto mai te awa, ko poneke. Te a te tumu e tuatu nei. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ei e koko. Kia ora ana tātou, Prime Minister Ardern, I am absolutely delighted to be able to bring the sunshine to Poneke today. To the members of your cabinet, the honourable members of the New Zealand Parliament, representatives of our defence forces, those that we've lost, those who have returned, those that are serving, and your families. The diplomatic corps, dignitaries, tō tātou I tangata kuki aireni. Ladies and gentlemen, kia ora ana, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou, e ngā iwi o te moana nui a kiwa. It's my privilege today to join you all as we honour the contribution of the Pacific to Aotearoa, to global peace and prosperity, in years past and to this day. In this place, Pukehau, I stand proud to represent our forebears, the people and government of the Cook Islands, and we pay our deepest respects to the memories of all those brave men and women who have paid the ultimate sacrifice to protect New Zealand and the Pacific in foreign wars, particularly World War I. In reflecting on the importance of a Pacific memorial here at Pukehau National War Memorial Park, may I draw parallels with the sacrifice that I am best versed in, those of the Cook Island soldiers of World War I. The story of the Cook Islands in the First World War is one of a remarkable service and sacrifice. One of the smallest territories in the British Empire, the Cook Islands responded immediately to the call for service and eventually sent 5 contingents to the war, totaling close to 500 men. Recruited to reinforce the Maori contingents, the island's young men volunteered en masse at the outbreak of the war, and like their Niuean counterparts, who also answered the call to service from New Zealand, 80% of those soldiers could not speak English, but were able to communicate loosely with the New Zealand Maori soldiers. Combined with Maori and Pākehā soldiers of the Pioneer Battalion, they soon saw heavy action in the Allied attack at Fleurs at the First Battle of the Somme in September 1916. Exposed to enemy fire, they helped construct the famous Turk Lane Trench that stretched for 8 kilometres from Fleurs to Delville Wood, and later assisted the tunnellers at Arras. Despite the unprecedented challenges of the front and the European winter, the soldiers performed their duties well and were singled out by Major Peter Buck, Te Rangihiro, for their hard work in tough conditions. The 2nd and 3rd Cook Islands contingents served in the Middle East as part of the Sinai-Palestine campaign. First, in a logistical role for the Australian and New Zealand mounted rifles at their Moaska base, and later in ammunition supply for the Royal Artillery. Well organised and disciplined, they again excelled and were noted as especially vigilant sentries. Their hard work and physicality was also widely admired, with one officer estimating that a single Cook Islands soldier did the work of 2 or 3 Europeans. Elsewhere, their speed and prowess in running surf boats from supply ships in Egypt led to threats of strike action by local labourers who were put out of work. Importantly for the soldiers, a separate Rarotongan company was formed in October 1917, and the unit remained an indispensable part of the Royal Artillery in the British Army 21st Army Corps for the rest of the war. In the first contingent, 3 Cook Islanders died from enemy action and at least 10 died from disease, as the men struggled to adapt to the extremely different conditions of Europe. More tragedy came after the war as men returned to the influenza outbreak in New Zealand and sought recovery from European diseases. A large number did not survive the return journey and died in New Zealand, on or their return home over the coming years. Lance Corporal Robert Bob Ngapo of Tautu, Aitutaki, died in Auckland of pneumonia, while Private Tuakana Atama Akeo of Manihiki died of tuberculosis back home in 1924. It is not known how many Rarotongan lives were lost overall. During a parliamentary questioning on the Rarotongan and Niuean loss of life during the war, Sir Maui Pomare reported they must have lost upwards of 150 by the war. There were no further details given and no further questioning. Despite their war efforts being largely forgotten by New Zealand for a long time, and a lack of true figures of death as a result of war-related illnesses, the Rarotongan participation in the war was proof that they could forge an independent identity abroad. I recall the story of Cook Island soldiers of World War I because for decades this was a lost and unclaimed part of our history. Through the tireless work of the families of our World War I veterans, the Cook Islands has resurfaced and reclaimed our contributions and mana in owning this part of our story. I believe there is much to be said in that same vein of amplifying the narrative of the Pacific's contributions to global peace. In referencing World War I, please also allow me to acknowledge the contributions of our Pacific brothers who also heeded the call to serve alongside New Zealand and Australia in the Great War. Our men from Niue, Tahiti, Tonga, Tuvalu, Fiji, Samoa, Kiribati, and Norfolk Island. Side by side, we stood and worked together all those years ago. It is a bond which has endured through time and is part of the foundation upon which our countries and people continue to flourish. Indeed, the contributions of the Pacific to peace and security aren't just historical. For more than 40 years, countries in the Pacific have contributed uniformed personnel to the United Nations peace operations around the globe. From 1978 to the present, Fiji, Vanuatu, Samoa, Palau, Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, and Timor-Leste have collectively deployed to 30 UN peacekeeping operations. Some of these deployments have taken place in the region, such as the UN missions deployed to Timor-Leste. However, most deployments to UN peace operations haven't been in the Pacific region, but in Europe, in Africa, in the Caribbean, and Asia. Countries in the Pacific have deployed military contingents, in the case of Fiji, military observers and individual police officers and corrections officers to remote and insecure environments across the globe, all in support of efforts to maintain international peace and security. Their contributions are worthy also of acknowledgement and pride. As conveyed by Prime Minister Ardern, the design of Te Reo Hotunui, o Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, draws inspiration from the conch shells left behind in the Aras tunnels by Cook Island soldiers of the New Zealand Tunnelling Company and the New Zealand Maori Pioneer Battalion during World War I. There is a beautiful synergy here with our own memorial dedicated to the Cook Island soldiers of World War I, which is housed at the Cook Islands Returned Services Association at the Nikau Cemetery in Rarotonga. For me, these two memorials, here in Puneke and back home in Rarotonga, serve as a poignant illustration of a call that went out and a call that was answered those decades ago, whose effects continue to resonate through time. It brings to mind my grandfather's youngest brother, who was sent to school here in New Zealand, but who joined up with the Air Force, lying about his age so he could get in, was then shipped to Canada, trained as a gunner and a radio operator, and undertook bombing raids over Germany. He was shot down, and he now lies at rest at the Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery in Kiel on the Baltic coast of Germany, many miles from his home. But these ties have bound us as one through the ages and have shaped our ideals, our values, our sense of responsibility to each other, and our national identity. This memorial, our memorial, provides some healing to a long-standing cry for the acknowledgement of the Pacific's contributions to Aotearoa and to global peace. It provides a space to reflect, to recall, to pay tribute, and draw inspiration from all those who have come before and all those who continue to work for our collective peace and security. Reflecting on past and present contributions of the Pacific to Aotearoa, to global peace and security, my challenge to us, to all of us, is to ensure that the Pacific is not forgotten in a narrative so often dominated by large world powers and traditional constructs of militarized conflict. Our contributions were and continue to be significant, our sacrifices keenly felt, and it is our collective duty to ensure that these stories live on and are woven into the fabric of our societies and the global community we are collectively obliged to share. Auraka rawa rātou ki aka ngaro poina ia. We will never forget them. Kia manu ia.
Me taki ma'atai, Prime Minister Brown, and just to pick up on part of your story, I wanted to tie a connection back from your granduncle Alex, who in fact, through a connection to Minister Meka Whaitiri's family, resulted in her uncle being named Alex after your granduncle. We've come to close to the conclusion of our beautiful morning here, and I'd like to invite Father Sikoa Kautu from the Catholic parish of Otari to conclude us with a prayer, which will then be followed by Destiny Vaasila and Adaya Kepatoanga singing Tu Ilunga. Father Sikoa.
O sakaina arapota kia mantakakawa kia yo naratataru. sina te taro. Tamara te asua, ngoe ko tau teaka Ion Tepe o I Karawa. Ko asa ni kapaka am karau Ioran te mani ngapu ngei, pakotan am karoirei o katapuan te kanurung ari sepen doko I bukina. Skarapo ko mua I bukia te kora ke asan nangana noia, me meuia, panai na te puakan tai on tapu ai kakakakoro. Skarapo ko diki bukin te tau teakan nusiran, I ke asa ni karikepei me apen na ko tepe-tepeke, ni puakan mga iya, payongan diki tiroi yon apera. Suringia mentataro I bukia, aki asan pua meuia, pamuin te buaka. Ska moai aki a meu, paasan to kanikai, mani karike na koira tirau, yon o terua, me tepe-tepeke e panin. Ke te imatu anna ki toki yon na pera, yon na peni kaputa, tirau me tiroin tainako. Stataro I bukin na ratau teaka yon nusiran, paapia rei tānako te kukurei me tirau, na koi ai apota nometan tainako. Kairi ai ron tam nei me roirei, pa nawaki anam kairiri, pe ongan te metua te kapaia Ioran tainako. Keri ki takanuri ngayo, pa kataurawara o kairaran tainako, pa nke songotangin tebu o sataya pa iai te pai enariki. Saro kon katanira I rarikim, ngwe sinan te asua, kona taripei era bubusi nanun naratai ni kainano, na kona agituki ni ka meure men puaka kanako, ngwe te pariteni ako mamaki men karoirei. A ke susuki yara, ana meuri te tama, me ana roi tenas, awana te tabumu te tamne I a roirei, nkai on tainako. Amen.
Samoa lawa tunu upele Ele ngalo o I taimi whaingata Tu mau pelo ngangana Fausia pelo Faa malosi Mana tua pea so ana mua Mana tua pea so ana mua Fa'alo I tangata matutua Fa'alo I tangata matutua Fa'avai o I lea tua Awa lava e te fo I tua Salofa e Samoa e Pulanga fo I mai This is the story of my warrior people This is the story of all Polynesia Where the warriors rule and reign Born as warriors and died as kings, Samoa. I wanna thank you for my freedom. I give thanks for a certain destiny. 'Cause you fought and died for me. Show the world to live in peace. For o tō tamatoa. Tu ilunga, ilo malasi, awa e te whewhe. I leoti, o le atua e pui pui o e, Yesu le leo leo mamoe, wha amalosi. O le atua e pui pui o e, Yesu le leo leo mamoe, wha amalosi.
We've come to the end of our ceremony for today, and we'd like to thank all of you for your attendance, both here at the park and online. Thank you to all our speakers and performers. Invited guests, you're welcome to enjoy refreshments, and we'll now be taking some official photos at the memorial, and following that you're all welcome to come and have a closer look at this wonderful taonga. Mei taki maata ki a koto katoa, kia ora i kia manuia.